Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel, not from the bunker, but as you can see from my rather nice balcony here overlooking the Adriatic Sea as I take a break on the Croatian coast with my family. And what you're about to watch is not a new video, it's actually a video that I have been forced, for reasons I'm going to go into later, a video I've been forced to take down and re-upload. And because it's a fairly significant video in my back catalogue, I've decided to go to the trouble of redoing it for you. So without further ado, here is the video in question. Hello viewers, in this video I'm going to be talking about paranormal experiences. Now if there's one thing that I keep being asked about, most notably in emails and tweets and Facebook messages, it has to be about demons and about the paranormal. Because if you've spent any time as a Jehovah's Witness, you will understand that it's part of witness teaching and witness theology, this idea of there being Satan and his demons, and these demons were cast down to the earth in 1914, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, and since that year, all of these evil, wicked spirit forces have been confined to our biosphere, and something that they delight in doing is terrifying people and confusing people and scaring people, and they do this with all sorts of malevolent intent. So they'll do it in order to make people falsely believe in ghosts. They'll just do it to cause mischief, to try and deceive people, whatever. But that's basically what you believe when you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses. You just accept that demons are real. And then when you leave Jehovah's Witnesses, let's say you even stop being religious, you accept that religion is man-made, you can be left still thinking, yes, but what about the demons? And what about all these stories you hear about haunted houses and exorcisms and people having paranormal encounters? How do we interpret all of these stories? Does this mean that at some level there is truth to either the Jehovah's Witness narrative or indeed the Bible narrative? Because if you have wicked spirit forces, then it surely is reasonable to assume that you also have good spirit forces, and presumably those good spirit forces are God and the angels and Jesus. So that's roughly, I think, why even ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are fascinated with the paranormal. And I won't deny it was something that fascinated me, and to a degree continues to fascinate me, but for different reasons. But I did wonder for a while, how do we account for this? How do we reconcile all of these different stories that you hear? And whenever I am faced with that kind of problem, that kind of issue, that logical kind of dilemma, I find that the thing to do is to do research. So what I'm going to do now is just share some of the most compelling research that I've come across. I'm going to explain to you how this research has helped me to arrive at my current position on the paranormal, and then I'm just going to leave it up to you to decide for yourself what you think. Now we're going to begin with a couple of pages from Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. And the pages that we're going to be reading from, in fact, Richard Dawkins is going to be reading from because it's part of his audio book. But we're going to be reading from pages 115 and 116. Now, I would actually recommend, if you haven't already consulted this book or read this book, these are just a few paragraphs from a wider argument in which Richard Dawkins is talking about the problems that arise when you base your religious beliefs on experience alone. And he talks about the fallibility of the human brain and its ability. He likens it to kind of software. He says the software in your brain can take something and turn it into something very different. So he explains all this, and then he starts talking about some stories from his own childhood, which we're going to listen to now.
Once, as a child, I heard a ghost, a male voice murmuring as if in recitation or prayer. I could almost but not quite make out the words, which seemed to have a serious, solemn timbre. I'd been told stories of priest holes in ancient houses, and I was a little frightened, but I got out of bed and crept up on the source of the sound. As I got closer, it grew louder, and then suddenly it flipped inside my head. I was now close enough to discern what it really was. The wind, gusting through the keyhole, was creating sounds which the simulation software in my brain had used to construct a model of male speech, solemnly intoned. Had I been a more impressionable child, it is possible that I would have heard not just unintelligible speech, but particular words and even sentences. And had I been both impressionable and religiously brought up, I wonder what words the wind might have spoken. On another occasion, when I was about the same age, I saw a giant round face gazing, with unspeakable malevolence, out through the window of an otherwise ordinary house in a seaside village. In trepidation I approached until I was close enough to see what it really was, just a vaguely face-like pattern created by the chance fall of the curtains. The face itself, and its evil mien, had been constructed in my fearful child's brain. On the 11th of September 2001, pious people thought they saw the face of Satan in the smoke rising from the Twin Towers, a superstition backed by a photograph which was published on the Internet and widely circulated.
Constructing models is something the human brain is very good at. When we are asleep, it is called dreaming. When we are awake, we call it imagination, or when it is exceptionally vivid, hallucination. As Chapter 10 will show, children who have imaginary friends sometimes see them clearly, exactly as if they were real. If we are gullible, we don't recognize hallucination or lucid dreaming for what it is, and we claim to have seen or heard a ghost, or an angel, or God, or, especially if we happen to be young, female, and Catholic, the Virgin Mary. Such visions and manifestations are certainly not good grounds for believing that ghosts or angels, gods or virgins, are actually there.
So I think what we've just listened to is extremely useful when it comes to trying to untangle the mindset that you have when you are raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And just to be clear, I have never had any experience of the kind that Richard is describing. Well, he describes his experiences and his simultaneous discovery of what they really were. I can't say that I've had any kind of encounter with demons or anything that I would interpret as an encounter with demons. I have certainly had friends who have told me quite passionately that they have had such encounters, that they have they've woken up and witnessed a demon in the room with them, or they've woken up and they felt as though there is a demon sitting on their chest, stopping them from breathing. So I'm aware that these stories get passed around, and I have personal experience of them being passed around. But I think reading those pages helps us to put those kinds of stories in context, because it helps us to understand something which we're going to come back to in this video, which is that we just can't trust our brains. Our brains are computers. They, like computers, they have their own ways of interpreting the signals that they receive, and sometimes they can interpret something that's perfectly harmless as being something malevolent, as being something that we should be fearful of. That's just the way we are as humans. Now, the next clip I'm going to show you is quite a fascinating speech. It's a TED Talk by a journalist called Carrie Poppy. Now, again, I would recommend you watch the whole video, because she's a very good speaker and she gives a very compelling story. And I actually need to tell you her story so that what she says next makes sense. So Carrie gives this story about when she was She had a small accommodation in California. I think it was LA. And she moved in, and before long, she had a feeling of there being someone or something in the apartment with her. She felt a tightness in her chest. She heard whooshing noises. And what else? It was, a feeling of dread, a feeling of something evil here. Something evil is here. There's something sinister happening. And this went on for weeks. And she tried all sorts of different things, assuming that it was a ghostly manifestation. And finally, she found her way onto a forum that was operated by skeptical paranormal investigators who were experts at looking into these things and explaining them scientifically. So she thought she would tell them what was what, and she would say, well, I'm the exception because this one is real. She explained what was happening, and one of the people she was talking to said, have you ever heard of carbon monoxide poisoning? And she said, well, I've heard of it, it's a kind of gas. Anyway, long story short, she got the gas people to come round to her house and take measurements, and they informed her that if she hadn't called them if she called them any later, she would very likely be dead, because she had way too much carbon monoxide in her apartment, and some of the side effects of that carbon monoxide were the tightness of the chest, the feeling of dread, and the hallucinations, and that's what was causing it. And I'll now take you to the video itself, because Carrie then explains how this experience helped her to get involved in this kind of journalism and in investigating things that would be classed as paranormal.
So that haunting story has led me to my job. I'm an investigator, and I'm an investigator in two senses. I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm also an investigator of the claims of the paranormal and claims of the spiritual. And that means a few things. Sometimes that means that I'm pretending to need an exorcism so that I can get, yes, that's right, so that I can go to an exorcist and see if he's using gimmicks or psychological tricks to try to convince someone that they're possessed. Sometimes that means I'm going undercover in a fringe group, which I report on for a podcast that I co-host. And I've done over 70 investigations like this with my co-host, Ross. And I would love to tell you that 9 times out of 10, science wins, it saves the day, it's all explained. That's not true. The truth is, 10 times out of 10, science wins, it saves the day. And that doesn't mean there's no such thing as a mystery. Of course there are mysteries, but a mystery is a mystery. It is not a ghost. So there is a group in Los Angeles called the Independent Investigations Group, or the IIG, and they do great work. They'll give a $10,000 prize to anyone who can show, under scientific conditions, that they have a paranormal ability. No one's done it yet. But they've had a couple of people who claim that they were clairaudience, which means that they can hear voices either from the great beyond or they can read minds. And they had one person who was very sincere, who believed that he could read minds. So they set up a test with him, and this is the way it always works. The group says, okay, we have a protocol, we have a way to scientifically test this, do you agree with it? The person says yes, then they test it. It's very important that both sides agree. They did that. They tested him, and they said, okay, you know what? You weren't able to predict what Lisa was thinking outside, it matched up about the same as chance. Looks like you don't have the power. And that gave them the opportunity to compassionately sit down with him and have a very difficult discussion, which basically amounted to, hey, we know you're sincere, and what that means is you do hear something in your head. And that guy got to make the very difficult decision but really the life-changing decision about whether to go get help. We're actually helping people to make these connections that maybe before seemed like otherworldly explanations, help draw us into reality and maybe change our lives for the better.
So I just found that a fascinating presentation by Carrie. It's not like I was on the fence when I was introduced to it, but I just thought her way of explaining things, especially the way she explained her experience and what that led to in terms of her work now, I just thought it was excellent. And there was also a very serious message to it as well, which is that this group that she was talking about in LA, they, by taking on these paranormal claims, specifically the claim that people have special powers, by opening up that kind of outreach program, they are able to intercept people who, despite being very sincere about what they believe are special powers, are in fact giving their own interpretation to something that actually amounts to them needing help, because they are hearing voices from somewhere. It's not from reality, so it must be from somewhere else. And Carrie explains that they were able to talk one individual into going to get professional help. So that, I think, highlights what I was saying earlier, and again, it will be a recurring theme in this video, which is that we just can't trust our brains. When what we think of as memories are just the way our brains have interpreted a bunch of signals when we were first having the experience, and then layered onto that experience in the days, weeks, months, years, decades since we had the experience, are all sorts of influences that can create what experts call false memories. And to talk more about the phenomenon of false memories, we're now going to listen to a short video by Elizabeth Loftus, who is a professor at the University of California, Irvine. So we're now at the point in the video where I need to come clean with you as to why I am re-uploading this video slightly modified, having been forced to remove it from my channel. I was forced to remove it by a gentleman named Bob Greenberg, who is an educator, runner and magician. The original video featured some footage of Professor Elizabeth Loftus from the University of California, Irvine, which was apparently filmed by Bob and which he uploaded to his The Brainwaves Video Anthology channel. Now, under fair use laws, apologies for the wind, under fair use laws, I am allowed to show footage of a professor sharing her knowledge on false memories, as I did here, so long as I fully attribute where I've got the information from and explain why it's relevant. In other words, I add some commentary, which I clearly did. So a link was put in the original video description and I introduced Elizabeth Loftus. But unfortunately, Bob apparently really needs views for his channel, so much so that he is rather ruthlessly claiming copyright infringement. And YouTube, although normally YouTube would allow me the freedom to challenge a copyright claim of this nature, for some reason, in this particular instance, YouTube gave me no such opportunity. So Bob Greenberg literally was able to arbitrarily order me to take down a video. Otherwise, if I'd in any way resisted him, I would have had a copyright strike against the channel. So to get round that whole issue, rather than show Elizabeth Loftus talking on false memories, I'm going to literally just read what she said. And by the way, I just want to apologize to all of the, I think, 16,000 viewers who watched the original video, many of whom commented. All of your comments have been lost because I've had to take down the video. So apologies about that. I did fight for it. I did try to reach out to Bob. He didn't reply. So I can only suggest that you head on over to his channel and watch his videos, because apparently he's very desperate for views. So anyway, this is what Elizabeth Loftus had to say, and apologies again for the rather blustery conditions here on the balcony. My name is Elizabeth Loftus, and I am a professor at the University of California, Irvine. I teach psychology and law, and I study human memory. And specifically what I study is not what most people think of when they first hear the idea of memory. They first think that you're studying memory problems, people with Alzheimer's or people who have difficulty remembering names. But I study the opposite. I study people who remember things that didn't happen, or remember things differently from the way they actually happened. So in one of the paradigms that I've used for studying memory, what we do is we show people a simulated crime or an accident, and then we might try to deliberately feed them some misinformation about what they experienced. So they might see the car go through a yield sign, and we suggest to them that it's a stop sign. And what happens when people are exposed to this misinformation is sometimes they will adopt it as their own memory and become convinced of it. So they'll now tell you, I saw a stop sign. They might be confident about it and detailed about it, even though it's a distorted detail. Then what we did is to see just how far you can go with people. We tried to plant entirely false memories into the minds of people for things that didn't happen. And we were able, through the power of suggestion, to convince people, for example, that they were lost in a shopping mall when they were 5 years old, that they were frightened and crying, and ultimately were rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family, all through the power of suggestion. So what these studies showed, and not just studies done by me and my research collaborators, but many other scientists around the world, is that memory is malleable. It doesn't work like a video recording. You don't just record the event and play it back. The process is much more complex, and the take-home message from all this is that just because somebody tells you something with a lot of detail and confidence and emotion, it doesn't mean that it really happened. So that was Elizabeth Loftus, and I should mention that Elizabeth also has her own TED Talk. In fact, I'm going to put links to the videos that I've shown you. I probably won't put the audio book, but I've already told you where you can find that material from Richard Dawkins. I will put links to both the Carrie Poppy and Elizabeth Loftus TED Talks, because Elizabeth does a nice long TED Talk about false memory, in addition to the clip that we've just seen. But I just find, well, what we can say in summary when we're talking about the paranormal, and specifically extraordinary experiences that people sincerely believe that they've had, I think what we can kind of conclude from the material, or at least what I've concluded from this material, is that experiences can be wrong. Experiences can be purely a wrong interpretation by your brain of audio or visual stimulation in some way. Richard Dawkins gave the example of a wind howling through a keyhole, and of a face that seemed to appear in the curtain, and only when he got closer, only when he went and investigated, did he realize, no, there's a plausible explanation here. So experiences can be wrong, and memories can be wrong, which is something that we've just been hearing about. And I think that that's something that's very important to acknowledge, is our fallibility, not just in experiencing things, but also in remembering things. As Elizabeth said there, our memories are not like a video recorder. They are malleable, they are prone to being changed. And as she mentioned, it's even possible to make someone have a false memory, to actually suggest to someone that something happened to them and make them convinced that that really did happen. That's how malleable human memory is. And that's why when people say to me, oh, well, you don't understand, Lloyd, I've had this experience and I know what happened. I will always believe that you are sincere about it. I will always believe that you're not just trying to fool me or fool others. I will, however, reserve the right to question whether that is actually what happened, or I will consider it very likely that you're under a misapprehension. And I should just add that another argument that I do sometimes hear from people in defense of the paranormal and in defense of their experience, they will sometimes say, oh, well, you don't understand. It wasn't just me who experienced this. There were others there as well, and they can testify to the same thing happening. But actually, when you listen to Elizabeth Loftus talking, and again, I would recommend that you watch the longer TED Talk that I was referring to, it becomes very clear that in a way that makes your experience, how can I put it, less credible is a bit harsh, but it makes me doubt your experience even more, because if there's another person there, then what can happen then is that you can start talking to each other after the fact. Let's say you've heard this really weird noise, or you've seen these really weird lights in the sky, for example. And then what happens is that you start talking to each other, and then you start interchanging your perception of what you've seen, so that what the other person thinks they've seen suddenly becomes what you also think that you've seen. So in a way, two people experiencing something, almost you can have this snowball effect where something perfectly innocent becomes something very different. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, where I stand on the paranormal, again, as it applies to the idea of there being demons who harass and confuse and terrify people because they are in our biosphere, having been confined there by Jesus following a war in heaven back in 1914, which is, again, what you have to believe if you're a Jehovah's Witness. I think that we can comfortably get rid of that assumption that there are demons inhabiting the planet with us. And for anyone who says otherwise, here's the deal. All I need is evidence. And if the planet really is flooded with life forms that are not human, that could be classed as spirit life forms, then it should be relatively straightforward to come up with some concrete, compelling evidence that they're there. But it doesn't wash with me to simply say, oh, well, you don't understand. They're trying not to be detected. They're not going to show up on camera. They're shy or whatever. I think it's more plausible for me personally that they just don't exist, and that it's the fear of them is just something that we're gradually having to shake ourselves free of as a species. When it comes to Christianity, not just Jehovah's Witnesses, but many centuries of believing in these things, I think we can get rid of it. I think we can move on from it. But that's not to say that I wouldn't be open. In fact, I would be fascinated if there was some concrete evidence. I wouldn't try and dismiss it if it could be scientifically proven that there are demons. It wouldn't make me want to be a Christian worshipper per se. But I would still want to know. I want to know what's true, whether it makes sense to me or not, is basically what I'm saying. So that's pretty much everything I have to say on the paranormal. Before I go, I must apologise for these really weird streaks of light. And this box of light behind me, it's nothing paranormal. It's just purely that I'm recording in front of a window, which is blasting sunlight in my face, and I've put some cloth on the window, but unfortunately it's not covering all of the light. So that explains what that is. So anyway, I really hope you have enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and as always, thank you for watching.